Welcome to The Being Leader. I'm Annabelle Graham. Hi everyone. Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Being Leader, the podcast that discusses how we need to show up and be as leaders, reflecting on what impacts our behaviours, our relationships and our outcomes, and allows us to focus more on our approach to leading ourselves, teams and our organisations, rather than just doing stuff blindly. In this current series of episodes, we're focusing on how we need to be with our teams, how we need to show up as leaders, and also the conditions we need to enable in our teams to make them truly high-performing. In this month's dialogue, we're going to shine the light on the topic of resilience and explore how this impacts us and also impacts our teams and what we need to do to be more resilient as leaders and also create resilience teams. I'm joined today by Sarah Jones, who is a trainer, facilitator and coach. Sarah works with organisations to develop compassionate leaders and resilient employees, people who are able to cope with challenging situations, both in and outside of work, and who can navigate uncertainty and ambiguity and can handle change and pressure. She specialises in training, coaching and consultancy around stress management, resilience and employee wellbeing, as well as a wide range of personal skills development training and leadership and management development. Sarah, thanks for joining me on what is a super hot day.
It certainly is. Thanks, Annabelle. Thanks for inviting me.
We're both sat here with fans going. So obviously I've introduced you a little bit. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you do and the type of businesses that you work with?
Yes, certainly. So I've been a freelance training consultant now for 15 years. Before that, I worked in financial services for 20 years. And the last role that I did in financial services was called performance manager. So as well as performance management issues, I started developing a big interest in the whole wellbeing agenda, and looked to introduce more training and development opportunities for staff, coaching team leaders, and various wellbeing initiatives such as supporting National Work-Life Balance Week and National Stress Awareness Day. And so I started to see the difference that it made to employee engagement. So it seemed like a very obvious thing to do when I set up in business for myself, to find out more about that subject and offer that to businesses. In terms of the businesses I work with, I still work with financial services, I work with councils, I work with law firms, I've worked in the public sector, the private sector, and we've worked together in the voluntary sector as well.
We have, absolutely. You know, and if we've known each other for years, but I haven't really talked that much around, why it was resilience and well-being that ended up really being that sort of point of difference for you and why you focused on that other than the leadership side.
I think it was because of the difference I saw in Barclays, where staff knew that their employer was investing in them, whether it was investing in their personal development, their well-being or their working environment. And what it proved to me is that when we treat people with respect, support their mental health, develop and coach them, it reaps rewards in terms of loyalty, productivity, low absence levels and turnover.
Okay. And when you see the type of work that you do, what impact does that tend to have when you're working with businesses?
I think from a simplistic point of view, people who are under a huge burden simply don't perform to their best. Any employee who's struggling with their mental health isn't going to be working at their maximum. I'm not going to bore you with too many statistics, but probably the one that really makes people sit up and take notice is that according to the Office for National Statistics, poor mental health is estimated to carry an economic and social cost of £105 billion a year in England.
Wow.
I know, it's just phenomenal. And it's whether you're looking at the cost of temporary staff or agency staff, recruiting new staff if people leave. It's just phenomenal. And of course, those intangibles of what does lower productivity cost an organisation. I also think I've worked with enough businesses now that I can usually tell the difference between those organisations where there is a genuine commitment to staff health and well-being and those where it's simply a tick in the box exercise. And most importantly, the workforce knows it as well.
Yeah, because I suppose that's going to show up in quite a few places. I know you said, from the sickness and recruitment, but that's going to be from, it could not even be persistent absence. It could just be, people taking off the odd day here and there.
Absolutely.
Taking time off maybe for caring, and it'll get wrapped up in other stuff. It'll go off in holidays or compassionate leave, so it doesn't even show up in some way.
No.
From that point of view. And I suppose also it'll kick into those pieces around sort of grievance and poor performance, which may look like something else.
Which is why it's so difficult to slap a cost on it, because there are so many intangibles. But the bottom line is that from a business perspective, it saves time and money. Yeah. But from a moral perspective, it's simply the right thing to do. We want to create workplaces where people feel supported, they feel valued, they enjoy coming to work, and they recommend that place of work to others.
Absolutely. So when you're talking to businesses or talking to leaders in organisations, what are the type of common issues that tend to come up?
I think the vast majority of leaders genuinely want to do the right thing by their workforce, but they don't always know what the right thing is. They worry that they'll say something wrong, exacerbate the situation, or offend somebody. The majority of leaders are promoted because they're very good at what they do: policy, procedures, problem solving, stakeholder management, whatever. But when they're faced with an individual who breaks down because their partner's just left them, or because they're dealing with a bereavement or a multitude of other reasons, they don't always have the skills or confidence to know how best to help and support that individual.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned 2 or 3 things there, which I think is quite interesting. The leaders who are promoted for being fantastic members of staff, or fantastic engineers, or fantastic salespeople, whatever that may be. I think in my old industry of retail, it used to be called you were given the keys in the car and kicked out the door, which literally meant that was how you trained an area manager. Here's the keys, there's the car, crack on. But actually, there's this whole fallacy about not bringing our home life into work. And I think we definitely see it in the coaching world, when you're talking to people and they sit there and go, okay, so these are my coaching goals, and I need to focus on influencing, and I need to get better at managing my team. And then you sort of talk through all of the barriers behind it and say, what impacts you? And you to find out there's a whole work-life balance issue and some stress there, because we forget we're individuals.
Yeah.
But we can't take us out of what we do as a role, no matter how.
And the most effective organisations are the ones that take a holistic interest in their workforce and recognise that there is a person outside of the 9 to 5 with problems, issues, worries, concerns, stresses. And if you can look at them holistically and support them, then you do still reap the benefits in the workplace.
Absolutely. So when you're looking at individuals, what type of signs are you looking for, or are you training people to look for, to be aware that there might be some stress issues or mental well-being issues?
I think the issue with the signs and symptoms of stress is that they are so wide and so varied. If I ask you to think of 5 people you know, the chances are you would come up with 5 completely different signs and symptoms. Yeah. So I think of my immediate family. For one, stress will manifest itself as IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. Somebody else it will manifest itself as sleepless nights. Somebody else, their skin will flare up. They'll get psoriasis or eczema. So it's so wide and so varied. So I think what I say when I talk to leaders is that it's looking out for a change in what you would consider somebody's normal behaviour. Somebody who's normally quite quiet, quite well-mannered, has an emotional outburst, or somebody who is usually quite extrovert becomes very quiet and withdrawn. Now, even then, we don't have to label it as that person is obviously suffering from stress, but it should be enough for their team leader or even just a supportive colleague to take them to one side and say, you don't quite seem yourself, is there anything up? We haven't labelled it, we haven't badged it, we're having a compassionate conversation because this person seems to be a bit out of sorts.
Absolutely. And I suppose you've got the challenge compounded on top of that if you've got managers and leaders who do the things that you and I know happen every time, because we have spent enough time working with leaders and organisations, talking about how to manage their employees effectively. They cancel one-to-ones. They don't have check-in conversations with them. Absolutely. They don't look up from their laptop in the process of having said one-to-one to notice that Fred is actually about to cry. He's that fed up with what you're telling him.
Yeah. And I really don't want Fred to cry, because I have no idea how to deal with Fred if he starts to cry. And this is why I call it compassionate conversations. It's just taking an interest in how somebody's feeling, how they're coping, what's going on for them, both in and outside of the workplace.
So I want to just pick up on that piece on compassion for a minute, because I think it's that piece about, it's another word. I'm going to use another one that I think sometimes gets misdiagnosed, empathy. And we think they're different things. So how would you describe compassion? What does it mean to you when you're applying it to that context of conversations?
To me, compassion is triggered by noticing someone who is suffering. It can be defined as a willingness and a desire to be kind and empathic to others. And leaders can't do that when they're busy focusing on getting the job done, targets, deadlines, KPIs. Compassionate leadership in practice means leaders listening to those they lead, working to understand the challenges they face, empathizing and taking action to support them.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that becomes a very tangible description for people as well, something that they can hold on to, because otherwise it's quite a big word, and I think people can struggle with big words if they can't see how it fits into their role, and that becomes quite a tangible way of looking at it. So have you seen anything shift? Because I'm conscious, obviously, we are how many months into a pandemic, and while I don't try and bang onto it on this, because obviously there's things that happen outside of it, it's probably with people working in dispersed teams. And I'm going to use the word dispersed rather than virtual, because I'm conscious that not every workplace is virtual. Some people are still out doing the day job, on the roads, up a pole, down a hole, sat in a hospital, working in a shop that they've been doing irrespective, and their work life hasn't changed. But actually the mix of how teams are working has changed. Have you seen in the conversation you've had with your clients a shift in what's coming up for their workforce, but also in what they're looking for?
I think it's massively split. So in terms of the people I've been working with virtually through the pandemic, I would say it's almost evenly split between those who are loving working from home. They're enjoying the freedom, the flexibility, money they're saving in terms of not commuting.
Saved a fortune.
Exactly. Enjoying the fact that they can spend their working day in their tracksuit bottoms or their pajamas if they so wish. And surprisingly feel as if they are more connected with their teams, because they're actually having more Google Meets or team meetings or Zoom meetings than they did when they were in the office. Equally, there are those that are saying, this has been going on too long now. I need that human interaction. I need what I can't get through a screen, and an element of frustration. And again, I think the best businesses are the ones that are giving people the option. So I know a couple of councils where they've said, forget coming back to work until January. However, if you need that human interaction, if you're fed up of staring at the same four walls, then feel free to come back in beforehand. We obviously have to put the measures in place for social distancing, but it's those businesses that recognise that not everybody is having the time of their lives being able to work from home.
Yeah, I think that's very true, and I'm seeing that as well with the clients I'm working with. And I think you've got this mix of, it's interesting how businesses who probably would never have thought about that beforehand, who would have been, actually, no, you need to be in the office 9 to 5, have now maybe recognised that for some people it's great, but for those who are either on their own or they're flat sharing or they're trying to work off their bed because they're sat in their room, it's not great. And others who are like, please God, get me away from my kids. And interestingly, a couple of my clients have said when they've done the surveys, if actually it's not working for you, they're the people who have come back first. So those who are actually fine with it, has stayed away, or they've done a mixture of people coming in and maybe working an alternate shift. So there's been a lot more, I think, awareness that it's not been great for everybody.
Yeah.
Especially now where things have shifted and it's not completely in lockdown. So there is that flexibility to be able to move. So when we're talking about resilience, again, it's one of those big words that brings up so many of different connotations for people. What would you say are the key characteristics? If we are trying to create a resilient leader, what would we be thinking about and focusing on?
Well, in terms of what I do with leaders, is I use a resilience assessment questionnaire from organisational health psychologists, because what they've done is they've actually worked to define the characteristics of a resilient person.
Okay.
So when I work with either leaders or individuals, it's looking at the characteristics of resilient people.
And what are they?
It's strongly believed that resilience is very much like emotional intelligence, as in it's not a static state. And if we're aware of what the characteristics are, we can develop our competence in those areas. Mm-hmm. So with resilient characteristics, it's things like interpersonal competence, self-confidence, having a positive outlook, being well organised, having a strong support network, being flexible and adaptable, personal vision or foresight, and problem solving. And if you Google it, the definitions change very, very slightly, and the names of the characteristics change slightly. But essentially, psychologists are agreed that there are these characteristics that make up a resilient person. So the questionnaire helps people to assess which ones they're actually quite good at and which ones they need to work on. So if we link resilience with mental health, experts say that one of the key characteristics is having a strong support network around you. And it's not just saying, well, my sister could be my support network, and I can go to her about anything, whether it's work related or non-work related. And the problem with only having one person in your support network is, well, what about if she's under excessive pressure or stress, or she's not available? I'm not going to want to burden her with my issues. So having a wide and diverse support network gives us people that we can go to. And the other thing I talk about is that actually the person that you might go to when you're bursting to share some really good news isn't necessarily the person that you go to when you want somebody to give you some practical advice or challenge you. So things like a strong support network are really important. And the questionnaire helps you to assess, well, which ones do I come out quite high in, and therefore focus your efforts on the ones that perhaps you score lower in.
Absolutely. And when we're thinking about that, because I think, and I absolutely have seen that support network, and I've especially seen it with leaders and with where they are the support network for their employee. They have no one else to go to.
Yeah.
And that's really draining, because it's like, not only am I your manager, not only am I having to deal with all this stuff at work, I now am your emotional support as well.
It's draining, but it's also a huge responsibility. I don't want to get this wrong. This is somebody's mental health and emotional well-being that I'm talking about. I need to get this right.
Yeah. And equally, I think there's the guilt of going, I don't know if I can support this, and what happens if I stop?
Yeah.
So we get this whole piece around attachment theory coming in, of how do I pull myself away in a careful way?
It's what I was saying at the beginning, really, that the majority of leaders genuinely want to do the right thing by their workforce, but they don't always know what the right thing is to do.
Absolutely. And there's a fear in that. There's a fear of stepping over that line and talking about the personal side in case I get, caught up in it, or actually I'm out my depth and I don't know what to say anymore. So resilience, there's that support network that's really important, and making sure that we've got that. What else would be that thing too? As well
as going through those characteristics of resilient people, I talk through an ABC strategy. where A is awareness, B is balance, and C is control. So under awareness, it's what causes you stress. How resilient are you? I talk about something I call the resilience reservoir, which is, what tops up our resilience reservoir. When are we feeling really good in ourselves and able to deal with whatever life throws at us? And actually, when is our resilience reservoir drained, and we know that we don't have those emotional reserves, depending on what life throws at us. And then the B is balance, which is looking at how much pressure we can cope with before we start to experience stress. What's the impact of stress on our performance? What does it do when we're constantly working in a high pressure environment? And the C is control, which is what the practical steps that you can do to help combat the negative effects of stress.
Absolutely. So that awareness piece is from the questionnaire to think about those characteristics, but also being really practical and go, when am I doing really well? What does a good day look like? And what do I do to feed into that good day? Do I have plenty of sleep? Do I eat breakfast? Do I have a leisurely journey to work, or do I have time? I go for a walk, if I'm working from home.
Yeah. And awareness about the signs and symptoms, because like I said, I can't say these are the sort of signs and symptoms that you will experience, because they're so wide and so varied, and they change from one person to another. And even what causes us stress in the first place will be different from one person to another, not just how it manifests itself. So that awareness piece is really important, because that's what enables us to be proactive. If I know that a meeting with a particular senior exec always winds me up and I see red, and I know that my signs and symptoms are that, I don't know, I'll drink more than usual, I'll smoke more than usual, I'll have a sleepless night, I'm more short-tempered than usual. If I know that stuff, then I can put in coping strategies to deal with it. I might not be able to avoid that meeting with that senior exec that drives me nutty, but I can go in perhaps slightly armed or slightly prepared for that interaction, because I know that it's that person that will press all those buttons and make me see red. So I go into it with a different mindset. So the awareness piece is really important.
And I think that's the bit people struggle with, that because we don't we don't stop enough to pay attention.
No.
I know I talk to clients very often, and we'll come out especially in a coaching session, we might come out the first coaching session, and I'll say, right, between now and the next session, I just want you to notice.
Yeah.
This might be when we're talking about emotional control, notice when you get annoyed, notice what winds you up, notice what those triggers are. And you can sort of see in their brain going, I don't know what noticing is. You can't do anything about it until you're aware of it. And you will slip into it. You will see red, you will get snappy, you will get annoyed, you will have the extra glass of wine or the extra fag. But until you notice it, you can't then do the control
Exactly.
piece. Okay. So the balance piece I thought was quite interesting, about how much pressure we can cope with before that impacts us.
Yeah.
And listening to you, that sort of triggered my mind around the challenge and support matrix.
Yeah.
Around what does support look like for us in the face of pressure? And does that come into it? Whether or not that support that we either have from people, or the support network you mentioned, does that impact on how much pressure we can take?
Yeah, I think this is all inextricably linked, but the amount of pressure we can all cope with can change on a monthly, weekly, even daily basis. So depending on what else we've got going on in our lives, which comes back to what I was saying about taking a holistic approach. So something that on Monday I just ignore, or it washes over me, but by the following Monday I've had something happen, problems in my personal life, or perhaps a deadline that I missed, and then I got a hard time from somebody because I've messed something up or whatever, and a similar situation happens a week later and I fly off the handle. So it's, again, once we're aware of these triggers, these early warning bells, I know when I need to take action to look after myself and take action before I feel as if there's no alternative than to ring in sick with stress.
Absolutely. So obviously we've been talking about how we build resilience within us individually, and that's never going to go away. There's always going to be an individual element to it. But how, as leaders, do we go about building resilience in our teams?
I think there's a place for stress awareness training for managers so that they can spot the signs and symptoms and start to develop confidence in having those difficult conversations. I think there's benefit in having resilience training for staff to raise awareness about what causes them to experience pressure and stress. But I want to come back to what I was saying before about this holistic approach to well-being. I've got a business partner called Rachel Watson, who's a highly experienced coach, and she's actually worked with a number of businesses to deliver life coaching to the workforce. So an individual can book a 40-minute coaching session with Rachel. And whilst some of the sessions cover work-related topics, by far the majority of sessions discuss non-work-related issues, which again goes back to we need to look at the person outside of work and what's happening for them outside work that might be impacting on their productivity, their performance, and their motivation inside of work. And those organisations recognise that if we can start to help people with those out of work issues, it will pay dividends in the workplace. Because the majority of us don't compartmentalise our work selves and our out of work selves. If you've had a particularly difficult day at work, you don't simply shrug that off when you get home at night. And similarly, if you've got issues in your life outside of work, it's hard to put those to one side when you're in work mode. And I genuinely believe that any employer who recognises that will see payback in terms of improved staff loyalty, retention, absenteeism, and motivation. It comes back to that holistic approach to staff well-being and genuinely caring for your workforce.
Yeah, and I think, if I think about the coaching assignments we have, 9 times out of 10, it's in that executive leadership level, and we're there to focus on leadership. But as I was saying before, that the personal side will come out, and sometimes you've got to deal with that part first, because ultimately, if you're trying to develop somebody or change somebody, you're talking about behavior at any single point, even if they're just, ticking a different box on a form, it's still behavioral change. And tapping into, so what is impacting that? What patterns are there going on in your life? When are you working well? When are you being emotionally resilient and able to emotionally manage yourself, and not able to feeds into that resilience piece? So it crosses over so easily.
Anything that's a barrier, whether it's in work or outside of work, is going to impact their ability or willingness to move forward. So if we can help with that in any way, it clears the way for the work stuff, the performance issues.
Okay. So if we think about that sort of takes an approach which works more at an organisational level and thinks about how do we enable the workforce to be resilient and what can we put in place. But if I'm a leader working with my team and that's not available in my workforce, what does a resilient team look like?
I think a resilient team would look at the same as any high-performing team. They'll be willing to help each other, to go the extra mile. They will genuinely look out for each other. And that's why I said, when you see somebody who isn't behaving as you would normally expect them to behave, it doesn't have to be a leader's responsibility to take them to one side and say what's going on. Any supportive colleague will notice that somebody is out of sorts, and quite often they're better placed to be able to see those changes in somebody's personality. And it's just being compassionate, it's just being caring. And you'll see that happening in a resilient team.
Okay. And we were talking earlier about the outputs of that. How's that going to play out from a results point of view? Because I think people, they get that there is an importance to focusing on well-being and focusing on resilience, but often there's that justification of, well, what's it going to give me?
Absolutely. And a lot of those are intangibles, so it isn't necessarily that easy to slap a cost on it and say, well, look at what that's done to productivity and look what that's done to performance levels or KPIs. it isn't always something tangible like that. But the intangibles will be, this feels like a nice place to work. So in Barclays, when I took on this role of performance manager, my brief was to improve the working environment. That was my job title, or my job brief was to improve the working environment, because they wanted to increase the workforce. And to do that, because at the time it was a period of low unemployment, they needed people to be recommending it as a place that people wanted to come to work. So those are the intangibles, people saying, well, this is where I work, and they offer this and they offer that, and we do this. And I did some training last week, and we have a concierge service, and they promote flexible working, whatever it might be. But people are talking with pride about the place that they work.
Okay. So if we're thinking about, to people listening, thinking, what can I do if I'm paying attention to, if I start to build my awareness and think about how much pressure I can take from that balance point of view, what are some of those control mechanisms? What can I do to make myself more resilient or to be more mindful? What would your top tips be?
Okay, well, from a personal resilience perspective, I would say first and foremost, be aware of what fills or drains your resilience reservoir. How healthy, how resilient do I feel right now? So if life were to throw me a curveball, how well would I deal with it? And what empties and fills our resilience reservoir is very different from one person to another. So for me, as you know, I love my holidays. I go on quite a lot of holidays. So when I've been on lots of holidays, that fills my resilience reservoir. Resilience reservoir not looking so good for me in 2020.
No. Mine's fantastic. Mine's going outside, doing lots of walking and being out in nature. So mine's happy as Larry. It's getting 2 hours a day.
So mine's pretty much drained, and I've had to sort of dig a little deeper to find my my coping strategies. So it varies very much from one person to another. So then it's a case of having a range of coping strategies. So as you know, Annabelle, I'm a yellow expressive. So my coping strategies are socialising with friends, spending time with family, going on holidays. Those are the things that fill my resilience reservoir. So from a serious perspective, with the pandemic this year, it's really reinforced the need for me to have a wider range of coping strategies, because I haven't been able to do the things that I would normally do. And my own resilience reservoir drained very quickly at the start of the pandemic. So I have had to learn to appreciate the outdoors, go on more walks, do different things to get the same benefit that my coping strategies would normally give me. So it's getting creative with your coping strategies, really, and making sure that you have plenty. So if one of those is taken away, like no holidays, well, that's okay, because I've developed a love of gardening and doing something else instead.
Absolutely. And I think it brings back, so for some people it might be, I know when I get a good night's sleep, that makes me, I'm able to cope better, or going on a run, or going to the gym, or doing yoga, or Pilates or something. It's that physical stuff. And when that isn't there, things collapsing.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's the physical stuff. It's our diet, our nutrition. It's what hobbies we do. And, just because it might not be possible, I know gyms are reopening now, but, if your hobbies are primarily going to aerobics classes, then once that's taken away, so I still need to get that feel-good factor that I do from doing those aerobics classes, so I'm going to do them online. So it's getting creative around those coping strategies, really.
Okay.
And then I think for leaders looking to develop resilient teams, I think my advice would be to set yourself a goal to have more compassionate conversations with your team. Set work aside just temporarily. Just ask them how they're feeling, what's going on for them outside of work. Inquire about their families, their hobbies, their interests. Ask them what they need, what would make their life easier. That's what I mean by a compassionate conversation. And I think because a lot of the time we're so busy meeting deadlines and trying to get stuff done that we forget that we're talking about human beings, and it's just showing an interest in them and showing that, you know, you are more than the person that processes something or produces something.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and if I think about, sometimes it's funny when you're doing different jobs, and I bump into lots of different people, you know, and I might describe myself as an executive coach or a leadership facilitator, but that doesn't really work when I'm talking to somebody who's, you know, 78 and walking the dog in the park. What do you do? And so my line is, I help leaders to have better conversations and be nicer to their staff. And actually, that's sort of what you mean by that compassionate leadership.
Absolutely.
You know, just talk to somebody. If you're doing a one-to-one, please put your phone down, stick your laptop out the way, and just genuinely go, how are things?
And do it authentically as well, because
Absolutely.
you genuinely care and you genuinely want to know how they are.
Yeah, not like it's 4 o'clock and my secretary's told me I have to, so I'll now go and be compassionate for 10 minutes and wander back.
This is where I have to go and wander into the office and ask everybody what they're doing this weekend.
So, we joke. I do remember somebody telling me, the director went on a course and he came back, and at 4 o'clock every day came out to talk to somebody as if it had been timed in by the PA. And that's when you want to just stick your head in your hands and go, that isn't what we meant by emotional intelligence test.
But again, to give that person credit, they wanted to make a difference. They wanted to engage with people. It's just knowing how to do it authentically.
Absolutely, yeah. There was a little bit of social awkwardness there, and thinking about, how do I come across in the first place? So we're thinking about our resilience reservoir. We are being creative with our coping strategies, and we are having those more genuine, authentic, compassionate conversations and really getting to know our teams.
Absolutely.
Okay, fantastic. So you mentioned your business partner. Is there a website that people can check out? Or
yes, we are thewellbeingprogram.com.
Fabulous. Well, we'll stick that in the show notes underneath. So look, Sarah, thank you for joining us. I have loved this conversation. You know, we have many over a dinner table, but invariably none of them about this. So it's really been fascinating. So thank you. For those of you listening, if you enjoyed this and found it useful, then please share it out with your teams or send it to a friend or colleague who might find it useful too. We can only grow our listenership by you telling more people about it. So thank you to those who've listened in to the episode so far. And if you also want to check out previous episodes on reflection or embodied leadership, which really sort of explore some of the aspects we've been talking today, then you'll find them further back in the list on the website. Thanks for listening to The Being Leader.